Shalom, and welcome to On the House, the podcast where you'll find everything you need to know about purchasing real estate in Israel. Hosted by Debbie Goldfisher, real estate consultant and founder and CEO of BuyItInIsrael.com. In each episode, Debbie sits down with leading industry experts to explore market trends, legal and tax issues, smart buying strategies, neighborhoods across Israel, and more. All this is On the House, helping you make the right move.
Welcome back, everyone, and thank you for joining us after a short break. We are now in season 8 of On the House, the Israel Real Estate Podcast. Until now, we've covered just about everything you need to know about buying a home in Israel, from the different types of properties, where and how to buy, what it costs, how much you need up front, mortgages, taxes, buying off plan, second-hand purchases, legal aspects, and so much more. And most recently, we devoted an entire season not just to buying a home in Israel, but to making Israel your home. Today, we are kicking off a brand new season all about renting in Israel. Now, I know what some of you might be thinking, why focus on renting when this podcast is about buying? Well, if you've been listening closely, you know that my real passion, the reason I do this, is to help people come home to Israel. And I know that not everyone is ready or able to buy right away. Renting can be a fantastic option, and if that's what gets someone here, then I'm thrilled. And here's a little insider detail. Even though we're called Buy It in Israel, if you look closely at our logo, the Buy It is actually Bet Yotaf, meaning house or home in Hebrew. It's always been about making a Buy It in Israel, a home in Israel, whether you own it or rent it. For this opening episode of our season, we're tackling one of the most common and important questions people face when moving to Israel. Should I buy or should I rent? We're going to look at the real costs involved in buying, from taxes and fees to mortgages and maintenance, and how that compares with the costs, benefits, and challenges of renting. We're also going to consider alternative investments to real estate, the emotional side of home ownership in Israel, the long-term financial impact, and some of the real-life scenarios that people are facing right now. For anyone who has arrived recently in Israel or is thinking about coming, this episode is for you. And with that, I am super excited to welcome our very special guest, someone I've been wanting to have on the show for a long time, who I know will give our listeners tremendous insight and advice. Rifka Lebowitz is a certified financial planner with over 25 years of experience in Israel's financial industry. She has built a reputation as a trusted advisor who has helped thousands of families navigate their financial journey. Rifka is also the founder of Living Financially Smarter in Israel, a brand dedicated to empowering Olim and Anglo-Israelis with practical, relevant financial education. What began as a small initiative has grown into a vibrant 40,000-member Facebook community and the annual LFSII Nefesh B'Nefesh Personal Finance Conference, the largest of its kind for English speakers in Israel. Author of Smarter Israeli Banking, Rifka brings a wealth of hands-on expertise from her background as an investment advisor, personal banker, and budgeting specialist. She is passionate about helping individuals and families achieve both financial stability and long-term success, blending clear, practical advice with a deep understanding of the unique challenges of life in Israel. Rifka, thank you so much for being here, and welcome to On the House.
Thank you so much for having me here. Super excited to be here.
Thank you. Rifka, before we dive in, can you give us a quick snapshot of your background, where you're from, what you do, and how you got into this?
Sure. So I'm originally from Glasgow, Scotland.
You're
Aliyah.
Kidding me?
Yeah,
why do you sound like an American?
Yeah, I changed my accent. I'm married to an American, and the Glasgow accent, unfortunately, has gone many years ago.
Goodness, how interesting. Although, you know what? When you talk, there is a little bit of something, but I would never have thought it was from Glasgow.
I know, right? People tell me that all the time. Are you from Canada? Where are you from? But yeah, I'm from Glasgow, Scotland.
How old were you when you came?
I was 12 when my family came to Israel.
That was not a thing. But from Glasgow, who was making Aliyah in those days?
Nobody.
Right?
Nobody.
Kolakavad.
It was, it was very much us. Not so many people were making Aliyah. And then after high school, I wanted to go into finance, and I really wanted to help people with their financials, and their day-to-day finances and making it in Israel. It was not a profession. Even certified financial planning wasn't really, certainly budgeting advice, like none of that was a profession yet.
Sure.
So in the meantime, I went into portfolio management in a boutique company in Jerusalem, managed portfolios for English speakers in Israel, and then I went into banking. And then it really became a profession to really just help people with their finances. Finances got way more complicated than it used to be. I always joke that my grandma says, why do you need this? In my day, we didn't need it. But people need it now. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of financial questions that come up and ways to manage things that people need guidance with.
It's amazing, especially in another language.
Absolutely. And there's so many little intricate details about the way things work in Israel that people just don't know. They don't even know what to ask sometimes.
So true. So true. Well, it's incredible what you've done. And I know for anyone who's contemplating Aliyah, this is a huge, area that needs to be, people need empowerment and education, and you're doing an amazing job. So thank you.
Thank you.
So as I mentioned, Rifka, today I want to focus on the rent versus buy debate. It's a question people face all over the world, but what makes Israel unique are the steep and constantly rising home prices, along with a high rate of immigration. So let's start with people who simply cannot afford to buy. They don't have enough for a down payment or they won't qualify for a mortgage. No one is giving them a place to stay indefinitely, and they don't have access to student accommodation. So the only real option they have is to rent. What does this mean in financial terms? Would you say there's a recommended percentage of income that's considered reasonable to spend on rent?
So it really depends on someone's situation in life. Like you'll take, a family, maybe a young family who don't have loans and whatever. 25 to 30% is probably the max. I like 25
of their net income.
Let's say they're earning 20 after tax, just for the sake of our example.
20 is their net income. Okay.
So somewhere between 5 and 6 is probably where they should be comfortable with their renting. However, if you take a young single person who is going to be renting an apartment with friends, and really they don't have a car, they don't have loans, they don't have many expenses, it could be 50% of their income is going towards their rent.
Yeah, that makes sense.
So it really depends on your life stage and what you're at. If you're coming with a lot of kids, let's say, and you're going to have 2 cars and there's going to be a lot of expenses going on, you really need to calculate, not just take the percentage, like my 25% rule or up to 30, but really see what works for your family, your lifestyle.
Build a budget.
Yeah, absolutely.
So besides the rent, what else do they have to take into account?
So part of that is that when you're renting in Israel, you're paying the municipal tax, and those taxes, the municipal tax, outside of Israel is not always paid by the renter. Very often it's paid by the landlord. And in Israel, it's paid by the renter. Now, if you're making Aliyah, for example, and you're going to rent, you can get, in most municipalities, 12 months at a discounted rate of municipal tax. That's on you, not on the landlord. So you'll get the discount even if you're renting a place.
I believe it's around 90% discount, but it's for 1 year. So it's a relatively short period, but it's helpful, at least when they land.
Exactly. It's helpful.
So what we call our nona, the municipal tax, is on the tenant. What else?
Correct. So sometimes the insurance is going to be split in 2, depending on the agreement you come up with the landlord, where content insurance and something like that is covered by the renter. And the physical building insurance is covered by the landlord, but sometimes that's not the way it's divided. Sometimes the landlord expects you to insure the property in case there's a fire or something like that. So it has to be clear in your rental contract who's paying for what. Generally, as a renter, you're definitely going to pay for your own content insurance. Are you required to? If you don't want to, do you have to? These are questions that can come up and can be negotiated when people are negotiating a contract. And then obviously there's the monthly rent, which in general in Israel, we don't use checks so much anymore, but that is one place where people use checks because it gives the landlord a certain amount of security knowing that they're holding 12 of your checks, because they can always come and say, look, I have this check, this person owes me money. Whereas if it's a bank transfer, the landlord will feel that they don't have the security of knowing you'll actually make the transfer next month.
Sure, makes sense.
They may have an agent fee. If they took an agent to find the property, then the agent will probably get about 1 month of rent as their fee, so that's something else to take into account. And then really that's their expenses. We need to take into account that a contract should be clear about who pays for upkeep, but generally the upkeep should be on the landlord. unless it's daily wear and tear. But the upkeep should be on the landlord and not on the tenant. So they really have it somewhat headache-free.
Okay, great. So if I've understood correctly, after paying the rent, you're saying they have to take into account the municipal taxes, obviously the utilities, gas, electricity, water, contents insurance, anything else?
So when someone's looking to rent, the first thing they're going to come up with is the fact that the landlord is going to want to secure some money in case you wreck the home, in case something happens to the home. So very often they're asking for a few months of rent. So even if you're saying, well, I really don't have money to buy, you need some money. Obviously, this is way less than if you were buying a house, but you need some money, possibly 3 months of rent income, to give to the landlord in one way or another for them to have a security against the apartment. So that's important to understand.
Even before they pay the rent, they need to have some security. If they don't have it, they can ask family members for that sort of money.
They can negotiate with the landlord sometimes, a security check that isn't deposited maybe, or other things. Maybe they can get someone to, secure the money for them, whatever it is. But yes, that is something we're going to come up with in many cases, not every case.
Okay, good. So next week we're going to speak with a lawyer to talk about the legal aspects of renting, both from a landlord and a tenant's perspective, and we're going to go into all the options for the security. But the important thing is that you will need to come up with the security. It's not just paying the rent. So from a financial perspective, they're somewhat stable. They know where they stand. They pay the rent. They pay the bills. They've paid the agent's fee. They paid obviously the moving fees to get to where they are, and then they pretty much can budget accordingly.
They know how much they're paying, and that's it. And it's a set amount, and it makes it easy, especially for people who are new Olim and are like, well, what's Israel going to cost me? What's it going to cost me? It's very clear when you've got a rental contract, this is what we're paying for rent, and we'll make that work.
Right. But obviously in financial terms, that means that their rent is an expense that they'll never get back. It's, unlike mortgage payments where they're actually building equity over time. So I'm interested to think with you, Rifka, how can someone in that position make renting sustainable and still work towards their long-term financial goals?
Basically, you're right. When people are renting, very often they're putting their money towards someone else's property, building equity for someone else, but it obviously allows them to live somewhere. And they might not be building equity towards their own property. And we find that in Israel, because you need a minimum of 25% down for your first property, people really need to focus on saving and building investments in order to even get close to buying their first property, especially as you started this episode saying, for the people that can't afford to buy property. So very often, in order for people to get to a level where they can buy property, they're needing to bring in a lot more income to put money aside, to save, to invest, to not only pay rent, but to get to that point where they've got 25% down. An average Israeli apartment costs 2.3 million shekel, which means someone would
say that again. An average
Israeli apartment
costs with 3 bedrooms?
Yeah. Costs 2.3 million shekel.
Unbelievable. Okay, so in dollar terms, that's more than 600. What is it? 650?
Yes, about 670,000 with a dollar rated today.
For an average apartment in Israel, and that doesn't really take into account the Anglo areas, which usually there's a premium on. People want to live where the Anglos are. The average is higher than that.
Yeah,
it's a lot of
exactly.
Money.
It's a lot of money. And to get to that down payment for someone starting out without much of a down payment, that takes a long time. And then, let's just say you're buying an average apartment at the 2.3 and you've put down 25%, you're still looking at a mortgage of 1.7 million shekel. So there definitely is, people can aim for this, but not everyone will get there, unfortunately.
So many people are wondering, how do Israelis do it? Especially the young couples. How do they do it?
So it's interesting because everyone's got their own story, but I'll give you some examples of what I've seen that Israelis do, which may or may not be appropriate for Olim, but it will give some insight into what Israelis do.
Please.
First of all, culturally, just like maybe in the U.S., American parents, from when a kid's born, will be thinking, how am I going to pay for college? How am I going to get them through college? Culturally in Israel, parents do know that it's very helpful to help children for an apartment. Now, obviously, this is not everyone, and not everyone can afford it, and not everyone wants to do it. But definitely it's part of the culture to try and help kids.
It's so interesting. I've mentioned this a few times in different episodes. The concept of home ownership in Israel is really a lot of significance is put on it. It's also a Jewish thing. We encourage our children to get married and build a home and settle down. And in Israel, I think even more so than outside of Israel, tremendous emphasis is put on helping the children buy a home. As you said, not everyone can do it, but there is a culture.
There's definitely a culture, and I'll just comment on that I think that there's a feeling of security that comes from owning a property that Israelis need. I think because we're all immigrants on some level, whether people have been here, since the beginning of the state or more recent immigrants, there's definitely a very big focus on buy a property, get in the property ladder. So as I said, some parents are able to help their kids, and it's part of the culture and norm. Secondly, sometimes you'll find that kids will live with their parents for a lot longer than they might abroad. Or even if they're married, if their parents have a unit or whatever, there's that whole concept of okay, I'll make a little rental unit. Where I live, a lot of people have rental units. It gives extra income. When their kids get married, they live in the rental units with no rent, which gives them time to save.
Sure. And it's a way of helping their kids financially.
Absolutely. It's a huge help.
So they're not paying rent and they're able to save. It's amazing.
Absolutely. It's huge. And then you've got people, you've got something like a Keren Ishtalmut, which is a 6-year tax-free savings plan, tax-free for Israelis, not necessarily for Americans, and saving and pulling together different things, whether it's taking the Keren Ishtalmut after the 6 years, whether it's saving income, what people have, borrowing money, sometimes people do. The banks will not let you not give 25% of your own money, but sometimes people will borrow not from a bank, a family member, or whatever. Just be very careful when doing this, because I don't want people to end up buying, not be able to afford the mortgage and repay some sort of loan.
Right.
So we have to be careful with that. I've also seen couples, you get couples that come out of the army, they both get decent jobs in Israel, and they really are able to save.
Amazing.
I will see that in Israelis, they've come out of units where they're very employable pretty fast. And I've seen couples be able to save significant amounts.
I've said this before on one of the other episodes, and I don't mean to sound chutzpahdik, but I think it's okay to ask family members. Obviously, if the answer is no, it's no. And I've even seen people who have borrowed against a Yerusha. In other words, they've asked parents and grandparents who, plan to leave money for them in the future if they can borrow it. And they've, in many cases, actually agreed.
I've seen that also. I've also seen where the parents own their property and don't have much of a mortgage. The parents sometimes will allow the child to take a mortgage against their property. In addition, like a home equity loan type thing, where they'll get a sum of money and then they could use that, and it's on the parents' property. Like what they call in Hebrew, kombinot, a lot of different things that are pulled together in order to get to the sum of money, in order to get into the market. It's so important for people. And then once they're in the market, hopefully, even if they bought something really small down south or all the way up north, hopefully the price will go up enough that after a few years they have more equity, they've managed to save a little more, and they're able to buy something a little larger.
Beautiful. So that really brings me to my next question. What do you think about buying something that isn't necessarily what you would dream of or what you had in mind, but in order to get on the property ladder, buying something smaller or outside in the peripheral areas in order to get that foothold? What do you think about that?
So I think there's two levels to address that. One is the financial, and two is the who are you emotional type level. Some people, when you mention an idea like that to them, are like, absolutely not. I don't want to be a landlord. I don't want to be traveling to some place. I don't want the potential of a problem with the plumbing and have to deal with it at 2 a.m. And they really don't want to deal with that. So we have to sort of first ask ourselves, is this something we could deal with, we would want to deal with? And some people get really excited about that. Of course, that sounds amazing. I'll buy a property, and I know people that have done it.
It's very common among Israelis.
It's very common. I'll buy something in the middle of nowhere out of 2 rooms, but it'll give me, and it'll go up, and after a certain amount of time, I'll have this amount of money extra from it, and I'll be able to buy something else. And I've seen people do it successfully, but it takes a certain personality. It is not something that I recommend for everyone.
Not for everyone, yeah.
Because it has its challenges, it has its costs, it has its time costs, it has its energy costs. But yes, that definitely is something that I've seen, and I've seen it work for people. Obviously, nobody can promise, but yeah, that is definitely a way that a lot of Israelis get in. Another way that Israelis get into the market is what's called Mechir Lemishtaken.
By the way, we're recording on Sunday, August 10th, and today they're opening a new lottery for the discounted housing, Dira B'Hanacha.
Exactly. So this whole getting registered for Dira B'Hanacha, Mechir Lemishtaken, allows many people to get into the market. And actually, I've seen a lot of Olim be able to buy that way.
Fantastic.
Because it allows people into a property for a lower price, a lower down payment, good mortgage terms. Yes, you can't sell for 5 years. Yes, it could take a while to get built. You don't win and then it's built immediately. It takes a while. It's a process. But I've seen people make very significant amounts of money by doing that. Whether
the value is built into the deal. They're buying it below market value, so they've made money the second they've signed.
Exactly.
So if I'm not mistaken, today they're opening the lottery with 7,600 new units. However, 50% of those are for Miluimnikim, IDF reservists, who have put themselves on the front line for the last 2 years.
Thank you to everyone who's done that.
100%. So just going back to the idea of buying something that may not be your dream home, it's interesting. Over Shabbat, my married kids were telling us how many of their friends are now looking into buying in outlying areas, smaller properties, with a relatively small down payment so that they get on the property ladder. These are kids who are Anglo-Israelis, so maybe like for them culturally, this is less anxiety-provoking, I would say. But an important thing to remember as Olim is that you get a benefit when you make your first purchase in Israel on the purchase tax. And if you buy something as an investment, you may end up losing that benefit. So very important to check with a tax advisor or a lawyer before you do so.
I don't know if I'd consider losing the benefit. You mean if they keep renting it out, they don't get the benefit?
Once they buy their first property,
they don't get it again.
They don't get it again. Exactly.
That is correct. They don't get it again. They only get it on that first property.
So it's important to just bear in mind that you may potentially end up paying a higher tax on the home that you intend to buy in the future. But that's another discussion. Interestingly, going back to the emotional aspects, which we really can't ignore, even though we're talking about the financial terms and the financial perspective, we can't ignore the emotional aspects. And when you're renting, there's an advantage, especially for people making Aliyah, that they can come with flexibility, they can try out an area, they can, without making a commitment, without using up their tax benefits, and without, committing to an area and investing in it. On the other hand, there are so many, emotional aspects of renting that can also work against the tenant.
We don't know who the landlord is, first of all, so that always is scary. You're suddenly dealing with a different culture. A landlord could be totally Israeli. There's those things to take into account as renting. Also, in Israel, there generally aren't long-term rentals, but if you are talking about someone who's renting until they buy, very often it makes sense to have that flexibility the first year or two. Check out a community, check it's really a good fit, because sometimes we think it's a good fit and it isn't, or it's an amazing fit. But generally, if that's someone's idea, they want to rent and then they want to buy, I would advise buying as soon as possible. Meaning a year or 2 years, not just sitting around for 10 years with the money, because they'll find that Israeli housing prices have gone up. Obviously, I can't assure what the future holds, but that's historically been the case.
Exactly.
Prices have gone up, and you don't want to be renting and not own if you could have owned.
Right. But I do tell people who want to come and try it out for a year or two, before you sign on a rental lease, make sure that you can afford to buy there, because you don't want to try out an area and then when you love it, want to stay and then you can't afford it. So it's important to do some homework beforehand as well.
Absolutely. That's good advice.
I think an important thing to bear in mind here as well is that rent, for the most part, is not controlled in Israel. And it's really at the landlord's discretion to raise the rent whenever he wants, when a term is up, which means that you really don't know, financially how much you're going to be paying, and if you don't want to agree to the increase in rent, you're going to be forced to move again, which is not just another expense, but it's emotionally quite destabilizing to have to do that again.
Absolutely. We see on the Facebook group a lot of times people ask a question like, I made Aliyah last year and now my landlord's putting my rent up by 10, 20%, whatever it is.
Uh-huh.
Is that legal? What's the law? And we're like, there's no law.
There's no law.
Free market in Israel, which is generally a good thing. But yeah, there's no law, and there's whatever people will pay is going to be the rent market. And a landlord can put up the rent as much as they want.
Unbelievable. And I must say the rent market is so pressured right now because, first of all, many people were displaced from their homes on October 7th. Believe it or not, a lot of people have not gone back to their homes. We live in Modi'in, and there's still a lot of people from the north that are living there. They settled their kids into schools, they moved their businesses, and they don't plan to go back, at least for now. Then we have people from the 12-day Iranian war whose homes were destroyed or damaged, and they are now in rentals. And then we have such a high rate of aliyah, and people moving, and in particular in the areas that us Anglos are gravitating to, there's a limited amount of rentals. So unfortunately, it's a landlord's market, and
Absolutely.
they can almost dictate whatever they want, which is very difficult.
I'll add in another aspect there, that in cities like Jerusalem, center of Jerusalem, which is very popular, and Tel Aviv, there's a lot of pinui binui, buildings being evacuated to be rebuilt. And then everyone who lives in those buildings, and there's tens of those buildings with hundreds of residents who are moving out of the building, want to stay local, want to stay in, the center of the city. They're all renting also.
They're also looking.
There's a lot
my goodness.
of people renting.
Yep.
It's absolutely a landlord's market.
Yep, that puts a lot of pressure on the market. And then you also have owners who are deciding to sell their homes, during the term of the rental. And again, you can think you signed up, for a year or two, and you plan to stay there for many more years, and all of a sudden you're thrown out. So, obviously there are legal aspects involved, which we'll talk about next week with the lawyer, but, you can't stay somewhere if the guy intends to sell after the lease is up.
I feel like Israelis don't necessarily think long term in the sense of renting.
Mm-hmm.
Generally, you'll get a rental for a year, maybe 2 years. They're not thinking long term, and people, as you said, will be told, "Oh yeah, I'm sure I'll rent it out again. We'll just renew the contract. Oh, by the way, we decided to sell."
Yeah.
And that happens a lot to people. There isn't the stability that there might be in other countries when renting, that 5-year lease or something like that. Very, very rare to find here.
Yeah. Having said that, I do believe that there is a slow movement towards renting becoming more common, in particular for young couples who cannot come up with a down payment, and despite all the beautiful creative solutions, it still doesn't work. They're not able to. And, like many other cities, especially in Europe, where renting is, for many people, the only option, and it's very, as we say in Hebrew, mukubal, it is becoming more common. And even though we don't see too many long-term rentals today, the government are introducing a lot of incentives for landlords and funds and investors to build to rent. So I believe over the next decade or two, it's going to become more common.
I agree with you. I totally agree with you. And I think that because less people can afford apartments, used to be pretty much that people would, get to by the time they were about 30 could afford an apartment. And because it's so much more difficult nowadays and less people can afford to buy apartments, I think you're right. There is going to be that shift where there's just going to be more rentals, more long-term rentals. As you said, the government's looking to do these sort of things. So I agree with you. But it's a change that's going to take time.
It is. But I have to emphasize, and I know that we both share the passion here, that, we want people to come to Israel, and I don't want anyone to be put off because, the rental market is unfortunately on the side of the landlord. Many people do rent, and they manage, and even if they can't end up buying, it is an option. And as these long-term rentals increase in popularity and in scope, I think that more options will open.
I think also we're mentioning, like, you know, it can be hard, it can whatever. I know plenty of people that have really found long-term rental options or have done year by year, but have managed to stay in their property for many years.
That's amazing.
So yes, we have mentioned some examples where that's not the case, but it definitely can be the case where people can find good rentals, reasonable landlords who don't put up their rent too much or have it in their contract where it can't go up by over a certain amount, meaning the law is not protecting them on a sort of general basis, but maybe in the contract it says how much it'll go up each year so there are no surprises. And they allow themselves a level of stability within the renting. Absolutely.
That's great. Let's think about retirees or people who are drawing closer towards retirement, who are happily renting, but as they approach retirement or when they retire, their income is going to go down, and the rent is probably going to go up. Like, what can we advise people in that situation?
I think we need to address that as a case by case, because not everyone's income will go down when they retire. But if we're taking into account people whose income will go down, they need to build into their budget that they're going to have a lower income. Prices will go up. Inflation, is their income linked to inflation, not linked to inflation? How is it going to impact them so that they can make smart decisions? It's not just inflation that's going to bother them. If you have Olim coming from outside of Israel, whether, US or UK, just two examples I'm using, and you have the fluctuation of the pound or of the dollar, they might find that when they made Aliyah, their dollar or pound was, let's say 3.6 for the US dollar, and now suddenly it's 3.2, for example. Today it happens to be 3.4, but I'm just saying, like, It could really change.
Uncertainty in the exchange rate.
There's a lot of uncertainty in the exchange rate. The British pound also has been up and down, and there's been a lot of movement there. And people really need to take these things into account, whether it's because their income went down, like you said in your example, or because the currency changed, that they are working or spending in shekels and they're earning in a different currency, or they're earning less, as you said, and they need to budget according to that and make sure to have as much stability as possible, which could mean try and get a long-term rental and fix the price, or something else, but to make sure that they reduce the risk currency-wise, income-wise, and with the rent going up-wise.
Given that, if somebody does have the money to buy, would you say it makes sense to make that purchase, or should they consider investing elsewhere?
In general, I'm very much pro-buying in Israel because of all the different components we've talked about. The housing prices have gone up over the years. The renting price will go up.
The emotional aspects.
The emotional aspect of not having to move all the time, of knowing that you're in something. And in worst case scenario, if someone stretched themselves, and when they get to, 85, and if they really can't afford their life, they just don't have enough cash, they own an apartment, they could either do a reverse mortgage, which we rarely recommend because it's a very expensive thing to do, but it does exist as an option, or even sell the property at that point, move, downsize, whatever it is, but they have an asset.
I agree with you, 100%. And a very important aspect that we haven't touched on is the emotional aspect of buying a home in Israel. You're not just buying a home in Florida or in Paris, you're buying a piece of Eretz Israel.
Absolutely. That's incredible and special, and really, if we can do that, I really believe that we should own a piece.
B'ezrat Hashem. So let's go through the costs associated with making a real estate purchase here in Israel.
So besides the cost of the house, and you could be told that the property's, going for a certain amount, and obviously that could be negotiated. It's not set in stone. Everything in Israel could be negotiated.
I see a lot of questions on the group, how much can we negotiate and who negotiates and all that stuff. Absolutely. Everything in Israel is negotiable.
Exactly. So besides from that, obviously, and making sure you're not overpaying and getting good value for money and looking up what the cost was for other people that bought similar properties recently, which is always searchable in Israel. You need to take into account that there's purchase tax. If you're buying for over a certain amount, there's a certain purchase tax. Olim get a discount on this tax. There's 2 different tracks to take, so I'm not going to get into the technical details.
Yeah, we did a whole episode on it, but it's a big one. You have to bear that in mind, especially if you're buying it as foreign residents or as investors.
You may be able to get it back if you make aliyah within a certain amount of time, etc.
Right.
So this is definitely something you would check with a lawyer, but it can be significant, the tax, if you're buying a property over the 2 million shekel mark. Yeah,
we actually have a calculator on the website, on the Biden Israel website. If you want to calculate how much you will owe, it's a good place to do it.
That's great. That's great. So that's like the biggest expense. And then there's expense of lawyer, agent, moving costs, renovating, checking the property is up to, standard or whatever, having an assessor check the property, possibly a mortgage broker.
Right.
And then the cost of the mortgage, obviously, that you need to make sure you can afford the monthly payments. As you get older, Israeli mortgages, they're not necessarily given for 30 years. Very often it's shorter amount of time, so you have to make sure that that's affordable. Another cost to take into account, this is more after you've bought, is if you do have a mortgage, there's life insurance against the mortgage that the bank makes you take out, which is incredibly brilliant because it means that, chas v'shalom, if someone were to pass away, one of the 2 owners of a property, the other one can stay in the house because it's paid off. But it's an extra expense that people need to take into account.
And it gets more expensive with age.
It does get more expensive with age considerably, but also the amount of the mortgage should go down with age and you could adjust it.
Okay, that's good to know. And then obviously you have to bear in mind, once you've made the purchase, you have to maintain the property. You're responsible for all the repairs and all the upgrades and the roof repairs, the plumbing issues, whatever it is. It's not on the landlord.
Absolutely. All the things we said at the beginning are not on you if you're renting, are now on you if you're owning. And there's definitely a cost of ownership of home in Israel. The Dud Shemesh goes and
Sure.
there's just things that
Just
cost
yesterday,
money.
one of my kids was using the bathroom and the faucet broke. For no reason, just wear and tear, and have to buy a new tap and have it installed. You're talking close to 1,000 shekels just because it's my home.
Exactly. So there are definitely costs involved and related.
Rifka, are there any tools, calculators, or rules of thumb that you recommend for making the decision of buying versus renting?
A lot of times when people are thinking about their finances and there have been articles out there like, what if you went in the S&P 500 versus buying property? The S&P 500 might have done better. If you're buying a property, let's just say a property at 2 million and you happen to be putting down 700,000. If you put 700,000 into the S&P, that'll make whatever the S&P makes on average, let's say 8% on the 700,000. But if you're buying a property that goes up by the same 7% that or 8% that the S&P did, the property that's going up to the whole 2 million is going up.
Not just the down payment.
Because you have leverage, because you have a mortgage. So we're not really comparing apple to apple when someone's asking, like, what if I put the down payment in the S&P versus if I put it in a property? We're not comparing 2 of the same things.
There's really no formula to work this out because we don't know what the appreciation is going to be.
Well, we know that property, we don't know future. We don't know the future of the S&P. We don't know the future of the property. We think that we've seen historically that property market has gone up. It's been a sensible and smart thing to do, both on an emotional level to have that security and on a financial level that property prices have gone up. Of course, there are people who maybe have had brilliant business idea and invested it all there and made more money on their down payment. But most people will do better, it would seem historically, buying a property in Israel with the down payment. Once they're settled in and they're able to save and they have more money, then they could do other investments. But get that property and security down first.
Right. So I agree. The main value of owning a property comes from leveraging and appreciation. Would you say the larger the loan, the more the owner benefits from the appreciation of the property relative to their initial funds? Would you encourage people to take maximum mortgage?
No, I'm very into making sure that it's affordable and smart for them on a monthly basis. That's key, because you don't want someone buying a property and not being able to sleep at night because they don't know if they'll be able to afford the mortgage. So affording the mortgage on a monthly basis to me is the most important. I think most people, especially people who, are buying their first property and can't quite afford it, everyone stretches themselves a bit, but we shouldn't be irresponsible with how we stretch ourselves just because, then the property will go up more in value.
Yeah.
We need to make it work for us. We need to do what I call be financially smarter. It's not just about the money and having the property that'll be worth the most money at the end. It's about us sleeping well. It's about money working for us and being in the right property for us.
Love that. So in answer to my question, there really are no rules of thumb. You have to look at each case on a case-by-case situation.
Correct. We've general rules, but overall, I think each person really needs to look at their situation and see, do I have enough money for the other things I need in my life? Am I saving enough? Have I left myself a bit of an emergency fund? And what can I genuinely afford? So,
Rifka, there are a lot of people who are planning to come within 5 to 10 years. We call it the 5-year plan, the 7-year plan, the 10-year plan. Baruch Hashem, people have their eyes open and they're really doing things, actively making a plan to come. Is there benefit in buying now, or is it better to wait until they're closer?
So I think that people who are going to come, and we're looking forward to seeing you here, if they could buy sooner rather than later, it seems that historically that has been good, because property prices have gone up, because we don't know where their currency will be against the shekel in the future, and having something ready if they know where they want to live is good. There is the extra tax if you're buying as a non-resident, as you mentioned earlier. But I still think that people that could do it should be inclined to buy here. But a lot of people can't. I understand that. Their equity is all in their current home. They can't do it until they sell that. But the people that can, it's certainly something to consider.
Sure. So on that, I would say 2 things. First of all, as you said, the taxes, if you buy now as non-residents, will be significantly higher than if you wait until you come. Although we don't know what the taxes will be by then. Things can change. But right now, you're looking at between 8 to 10% of the purchase price as non-residents. In my humble opinion, over the next 5, 7, 10 years, prices of property will go up far more than 8 to 10%. So that's number one. And number 2 is that, as I'm sure most people have heard by now, there are different ways that you can buy something now, put down a relatively small proportion of the purchase price and pay most of the remaining amount towards the end of construction. Obviously, it comes at a price. Usually it's linked to the construction cost index, or the price is higher. There's no such thing as a free lunch, I always say. But I still believe that in the long run, for people that are able to come up with that down payment, 15, 20%, it's an amazing idea, because they're securing a property, they've locked in at a price, they have a place to come to. And as I always say, a home in Israel is an anchor. Once you have it, you'll see, it brings you home.
Absolutely. I feel like, first of all, they will still need that 25% down. They just won't need it at the beginning with this. But when you asked how Israelis buy apartments, that's something I probably should have added in, that, the developers had these sort of sales, these deals were like, put in a certain percentage now, give us the rest of the 25% in a few years. Bank of Israel sort of stopped that, but still, there's that concept of, we'll build the apartment, you don't need all the money for a bunch of years, and during those years, people are able to save.
Yeah.
Could be good for students, let's say. They know, okay, I'm not really earning money now, but I have enough to put down the 10% or whatever they need now. I'm going to work over the next 4 years and make enough to pay the next payment. And
so I'm seeing a lot of that, people who are not ready to sell their homes overseas. They can come up with a down payment. So this gives them time to finish, their business in overseas, get their kids through school, pay their debts. And then when they're ready, they'll sell their homes, wherever they are, and be able to pay the remaining amount. But as you mentioned, the Bank of Israel have clamped down on this because it comes with very high risk. A lot of people were buying, no problem, I'll come up with 15, 20%. But nobody knows if they can come up with the remaining 85% at the end. So for many projects, the bank have limited it to a certain number. And then the developers, who are very creative, have come up with other ways where they still offer the 20/80 payment plan, but that 80% is sort of through what's called a halva'at hakablan, a loan from the developer, where you're actually paying the developer. In some cases, they pay for it during the construction period, and then at the end you pay. But again, there's no such thing as a freebie. It's all kind of packaged together. But for people who want to make the purchase, it can be very, very incentivizing.
I agree. It's a great way to buy. And I think that you're buying in, as you said, you're buying in today's prices. You only need to come up with the rest of the money in a few years. And that's also how a lot of Israelis buy.
Yeah. But I must emphasize, before you do so, you must make sure that you can pay at the other end. And, if you decide at the end that you're going to stay where you are and you're not yet ready to come, or your home is not, worth what you thought it would be, and you won't be able to pay the full amount, you have to have a strategy. You can't buy blindly. And if necessary, buy something smaller or cheaper, or not in the area that you necessarily want to be, but at least you have that foothold in Eretz Israel.
Absolutely. And so important to understand the exit clause just in case you're not able to come up with the money, as you said, or something changes. You need to understand if you can sell, what the tax is if you sell. Because if you sell either within a year and a half of getting keys or before you get the keys, there's tax, 25% tax on capital gains there. And it's something people really need to understand. But if you're pretty confident you're going to sell your house, you're going to have the lump sum, that definitely is a smart way to get into the Israeli market.
Fantastic. And on that note, very important, before you make a purchase, make sure that you are allowed to sell before you get the keys. There are lots of developers that won't allow it, because basically what happens is you end up competing with them. If they still have stock and they're trying to sell, then you come along and you sell at a lower price and it doesn't help them. So don't assume I can just get out if I want to. Please God, it should go well, but check everything beforehand. So there's a strategy which I think Americans called flipping, where people would buy an apartment as an investment, hold it for a while, sell it, and then reinvest. And after a few cycles, they would end up with enough equity to build their dream home. In your opinion, Rifka, is this a worthwhile strategy in Israel?
I think most people would find it to be a headache in Israel. I'd love to say, of course, it would be great. But you've got all these laws of how often you can sell an apartment and when you're not paying the purchase tax, etc. I'd say someone who's savvy at property could probably pull this off and do well. But anyone who's not really savvy at property, I'd be quite hesitant about doing that in Israel.
Sure. Also, don't forget the entry and the exit costs, the taxes and the legal costs, the agent brokerage fees. It may not be worth it in the end. If someone inherits money, would it make more sense to pay off most of their mortgage or use that money to invest in another property and rent it out? You get that question a lot, I see on the group.
Yeah, no, we get questions like that for sure. So again, I'm going to say it's case by case. As an overall general rule, if you can leverage and get a second property, that could be very lucrative for people, and really, have someone else pay the mortgage of the second property by paying the rent, meaning rent it out, have someone pay off the mortgage. And when you go to retire, have a property that's just income or whatever.
Fantastic. If that works.
If that could work. But again, someone has to check out the numbers and check it works for them.
Sure.
And, I know that on a second property, even if you're Israeli, you're going to pay 8% tax on the purchase, which is a significant sum of money.
Absolutely. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
So I basically do three different things. On the highest level, I do financial planning, where I'm planning out people's money. This is generally people with wealth who want to understand how they can live until 120 with the money they have.
These are Anglos living in Israel?
These are Anglos living in Israel. Can they help their kids with an apartment? How much? What can they do? And we're really planning out their finances. I also do pre-Aliyah and post-Aliyah planning, budgeting, so that people can really come to Israel knowing what sort of budget to expect, how to plan out to come here for success.
So amazing, so important, because when people, until they can figure out that they can do this, they're not coming.
Absolutely, and they don't realize what steps they need to take to make it, to give themselves the best chances for success in Israel.
Beautiful.
Thank you. And the third thing I do is work more with couples or individuals who are like, okay, how do I buy that first apartment? How do I, save, invest? How do I get started? And then I work with them throughout their life as they want. to build up their financial future in Israel so they can really live well in Israel.
Absolutely amazing.
I love it. It gives me so much satisfaction to see when people come to Israel, when people buy an apartment because we've worked with them on getting to there, and then they're inviting me to their housewarming party.
Wow.
Or their kids, they've helped their kids, and their kids are calling me to thank me for making it work and whatever. Absolutely love it. A lot of satisfaction. I really get to help Jews stay in Israel and come to Israel, and it's really a privilege.
Incredible, Rifka. Wow, kol hakavod. We share the passion.
Absolutely.
Rifka, before we wrap up, I have 2 final questions I like to ask all my guests. First of all, where in Israel do you live? Why did you choose that location?
I live in a beautiful moshav called Neve Michael.
I know where that is. Lovely.
It is south of Bet Shemesh towards Gush Etzion, but not in Gush Etzion. And I chose it because we came to visit, and it was so pretty. The view, it's so relaxing. I fell in love with it the day I came to see it. I was like, we're moving here.
Love that. And if you were to move elsewhere in the country, where would it be and why?
Ooh, I don't know. I'm debating between, like, would I move up to the Golan because I like the peaceful and green and not too hot weather, and the Golan's just so beautiful, or would I move to Jerusalem because, like, it's our eternal capital? I'm not sure which, but I'll leave it open.
Okay, both choices are amazing. Rifka, thank you so much for joining me today, sharing such valuable insight into the rent versus buy decision here in Israel. We covered everything from the true costs of buying to the financial and lifestyle realities of renting to alternative investment strategies and long-term planning. For anyone who wants to learn more from Rifka, I'll include her information and links in the show notes, including the Living Financially Smarter in Israel Facebook group, which is an incredible resource for Olim and Israeli Anglos alike. Thank you everyone for listening. Please stay tuned for next week's episode, where we'll explore the legal aspects of renting in Israel, both from the tenant's perspective as well as the landlord's. Until then, shalom ulehitrot.
Thank you for listening to On the House. A special thanks to Mordechai Gordon, our editor, who makes it all possible. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe and share it with family and friends. For more insights, expert guidance, and access to listings and projects across Israel, visit buyitisrael.com. That's BUIT in Israel.com. Have a question or a topic you'd like Debbie to cover? You'll find contact details in the show notes. Whether you're planning Aliyah, searching for a home or a haven, or looking to support the Israeli economy, now is the time to buy it in Israel.